So you have a tender rate and your love overlanding. You have plans to do it big on the trace and some super glamping. One idea, deep news and reviews, a podcast the first rate and here just for you. You don't have to think about it, join us and be about it. Something interesting we want to hear about it, come on let's talk about it. Welcome to Waypoint Overland's Random Waypoints podcast.
Sponsored by Midland, communication for every adventure, the industry leader in radio communication technology and innovation for over 50 years. Sponsored by MYMEDIC. Sponsored by TEMBO TUSK. Sponsored by Shower Pouch. Sponsored by DMOS Collective, mission built and made for mobility. Sponsored by BrewTrek. Sponsored by Hard Impact Designs.
Always remember, the opinion you follow should be your own. Just consider the things stated here to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online.
You know what I wanted to talk about? We've talked about communications, but it's basically been about inReach. It's been about Midland's GMRS. It's been about CB.
Yep.
But I want to talk to one that you can give a very unique take on. You did a video about how to power up your Starlink, which I thought was excellent. Anybody who's interested in Starlink, I recommend them to go over to Drive the Globe's YouTube channel and to see that. Hopefully there will be a link for somebody to click on when they see this. But I think that's an excellent video. But I wanted to go into everything about Starlink. And I think you're the perfect person to talk to. You're down in Baja, and you're basically dependent on the Starlink. So, and you've had it a decent amount enough time where I respect your review. It's not like you just opened the box, turned it on. Oh, it works. You should buy it. You know, so I'm looking to hear kind of like how long have you had it now, approximately?
Well, Phil, I've actually had the Starlink now for just about a year, actually. I got it last spring, and it's been on board my truck ever since. And I got to tell you, I've done two videos, actually. One, I did the unboxing of it and the installation of Starlink in the truck. And then I did a second video recently about converting the Starlink to 12 volts DC power. So to go back and circle around from the beginning, I got to tell you, if you are nomadic, certainly if you're full-time nomadic, you live on the road, you work on the road, you want to stay in communication with people back at home or wherever, it's a game changer. The bottom line is Starlink is a game changer. I don't have any regrets about getting it. It basically is filling a gap that was in the market that did not exist prior, meaning that prior to Starlink, really in the world of, let's call it communication, because what we're talking about is communication, right? Whether that's right now, you guys are watching us on this podcast or listening to us in the car. This is all being done by Starlink, because here I am sitting in Baja. There is no cell coverage anywhere near where I am. And, at nighttime, I can sit here and watch HBO videos, movies. I do Zoom calls like we're doing right now. And it's just a game changer because it's not only, when you think about it, it's TV, it's cell phone, it's text messaging, it's emergency communication. It's all of the above. It's email, it's everything, right? So before this, I mean, on the road, you had cell coverage, You have you could get a cell booster like WeBoost or something like that, which I do have on board my truck. But I got to tell you, oftentimes, and for those of you out there that travel, you know, I don't care what state you're in or what country you're in, cell coverage can be sketchy at best, right? So that was the problem. And I always just tell people, you know, yeah, the WeBoost is great, but the problem is like if you got no coverage, it's not going to boost to zero to something, right? And the Starlink, you know, outside of having tree cover or something that's blocking it, it works amazingly. Now, here I'm sitting in Baja, I'm getting upload or download speeds of about between 200 and 200 megabits a second. It's screaming fast. You know, I'm not getting any breakup on our screen right now or anything. There's no lag. There's nothing. I mean, what's amazing about and what's different, what sets Starlink apart from everybody else is that in the past there were other satellite, what I would call satellite internet providers, HughesNet and various different things. DirecTV had one. The problem is that their satellites there's not many of them, and they are high up in orbit. So you can use less satellites, but the latency is much greater, right? So if your satellite is way up in the air, it takes longer for the communication to go back and forth. Thus, you get latency, you get lag. Well, Starlink is different than that. There's many satellites. In fact, I think they said recently, that they want to put up to cover the world about 40,000 satellites. So they're in a much lower, hearing things outside, they're in a much lower orbit. And thus the communication, the lag time is very quick. There is you can't see any lag here at all. And that is what makes it different. And because of that, it's much faster with no lag. So for people that are in the overland world, I got to tell you, like, you know, being down here in Baja is interesting because, you know, the overlanders come down here for the winter time. I would say just in 1 year, because I was one of the first ones to get it when it came out for RV. I would say it's probably, I would have told you something different when I got down here in November. I would have told you it was 50% of the trucks. I would say it's about 70% of the vehicles now that are overlanding have Starlink on board. If I look out my window right now, I probably got a dozen vehicles parked here on the beach, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9 of the 12 have Starlink.
Well, I know all summer last year, that was the talk of overlanding. Everybody I talked to who's some sort of a nomad that travels in their vehicle, that was the conversation. They have it, they love it, or that they want it, or they want to know about it. So that's why I thought it was a good topic to talk about.
Absolutely. And the thing that makes it different too is that, as you guys know, oftentimes a piece of equipment hits the market, whether it's an inverter or, you know, solar panels or, you know, whatever it is, that's something to do with your rig. There's complication to it, right? It seems like nothing is ever turnkey. You know, you get your piece of equipment and then you're like, you know, how do I put it together and how do I hook it up? And then, oh, you know, it would be better if I had this. So I needed this attachment, blah, blah, blah. What's nice about Starlink is it comes out of the box. You plug it in, you put the dish outside. It goes, looks around. There's a satellite, done. You got internet. That's it. I mean, the first time I did it, it took 45 seconds.
So I know one question that a person will probably have after hearing that is, because they don't know about it, because they don't actually have it, is I thought there was an app. What about the app? What do you mean you just plug it in and use it? Don't you have to have an app or something?
Yeah, so there is an app, and you download the app from the Google Play Store or from Apple, and it controls your connection basically. So it's on your phone, and you can look at it. You can run speed tests. You can rename your router. So mine is like Drive the Globe Starlink, and you can password protect it. and everything else. You can even set it to go turn on and off overnight if you don't want it to be on. It has a heating element in the dish. Interesting, if you watch my last video, and it's something I did not know from the beginning, all of the electronics, the brain, is in the dish. I always assumed it was in the router here that's sitting on my counter. It is not. You can actually use any router. And my video converting to 12 volt basically talks about that. And as long as you can get the power to the dish, and that's what the video shows how to do that. The brain is in the dish. So it's kind of interesting. And the other thing that has come out recently is that for those of you that don't necessarily, like myself, that don't like to set things up, you can flatten out the dish, the very dish that you buy from Starlink right now, not a special one. You can flat mount this dish on your roof. Contrary to popular belief and opinion, it does not need to be facing a certain direction. So people were always like, well, it moves around and it centers itself. Yes, that's ideal, but we've tested it a bunch of times, flat mounting it up there, just sticking straight up, and it does not degrade the speed whatsoever. So, for those of you that don't want to have to set anything up, you could flat mount it to the roof of your Jeep as an example, and you're good to go. You don't ever have to do anything. So there's a lot of advantages to this.
So this isn't the case for you, but I'm sure that you see a lot of other people. I think that Starlink would allow a lot more people to become nomadic. Yeah. Since COVID, there are so many people who are working from home. And I talk to these people, and the only reason that they are hesitant about going on the road is because there's no formal agreement with their company about them being on the road. So they're expected to have service every day and be able to be in contact with their company at a whim, on at last notice. Yep. So there are some people who have the freedom, but they were hesitant because their job depended on 100% being able to get online. And Starlink seems like that has just opened the door, because this year a lot of people bought Starlink and a lot of people hit the road. So this was like I'll years from now remember last year as a major point in nomadic life and it being a change because of Starlink. Just like I think a major change was Google when Google Maps came.
Yep. That's right. We don't have to use paper maps anymore.
And I'm putting Starlink on that level of a big historical thing.
Yeah, and in addition to what you're saying is that they were able to feel secure that they could connect it and in anywhere while being on the road. I'll give you another example. My buddy Kevin still works from his van as a consultant. He's been parked down here all winter long, and I will tell you that he's been on the road now for the better part of 5 years. But what's changed since Starlink, and he got Starlink about the same time that I did, is, and he said this to me, he goes, if there was 30% of the pie that I could park at before and live my life for the last 5 years, I now have 100% of the pie, because he used to have to camp in locations that had cell coverage and where he could get on a Zoom call and do whatever with cell coverage. Now, he would not have been able to stay, as an example, next to my truck here this winter. Last year, he would not have been able to come here because he did not have Starlink and there is not cell coverage here. So it's opened up a bigger pie.
And again, I'm trying to talk to people who don't know much about Starlink. Originally, Starlink was for remote living in a home. So this isn't just some flimsy service or whatever. This was supposed to supplant wires to homes, and people were satisfied with it. Another thing I'd like to, I know people are thinking, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. Give me something concrete as to how good this is. And so I'll do that. If you remember last year when we were coming into Overland Expo West, I had a video that we made. You remember we did the podcast on the cliff.
On the mountain in Indian Hat.
Yeah, in Utah. And remember, we were anxious to get that out, but everywhere.
Sorry.
Yeah. Everywhere. Yeah, it's Mexican hat. We both
losing my mind here.
But we couldn't find anywhere good and decent to and I had almost given up on it. Mm-hmm. I was going to wait to go to the media room to try it once we got to Expo, and hopefully that service was good enough. But if you remember, we all camped out in the forest together the night before, and I think it was Uncharted that had
Overland Uncharted. Yeah, that's actually where I got. That was the day that I bought my Starlink, was because of them.
Yeah, and I was sold on it because they were like, "You can use my my Starlink," and I was trying to be nice, but in my mind, I was like, this is going to be a waste of time. I have an hour-long video that I'm trying to download to YouTube.
It's bad enough. For those of you out there that don't know, we have go through some hoops and barrels to get things up to YouTube.
Yes.
I mean, I can't tell you how long stuff takes. I have waited overnight. I'll put videos up at nighttime and wait and sit, and I'll wake up in the morning and it'll be like 71%. And you go, oh no, still?
Well, I had got in my tent and I was like, well, let me start downloading it, and hopefully in the morning it'll be downloaded. Well, I started to download, and then I started taking care of everything and handling other business, and I was on my phone and everything. It was downloaded in about 2 hours. Now that may not sound very fast, but that's fast for an hour-long video on YouTube in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And since then, I've experienced it on other people's Starlink, and that was actually slow because I have gotten better download speeds than some people have at home.
I was about to say, if you recall, Phil, we were camped in Flagstaff there, and it was quite a bit of tree cover. So that was an obstructed Starlink at the time. Remember?
That's a good point.
And yeah, so it wasn't at full throttle, because I will tell you, when it is, I put up my YouTube videos are usually between 8 and 15 minutes long, typically, and from quote home base on a cable modem, it would take me usually between 20 minutes and 45 minutes to upload. On Starlink, they're going up between 5 and 10 minutes.
Well, I know at East, I met more than one couple who have it they bought it for mobile life, but it was so good that they've gotten rid of their service at home, and now it's just their service whether they're at home or they're traveling.
Which, by the way, is what a lot of people that I've met down here do as well, that are not full-timers on the road. So they purchase Starlink, they have it on their van or truck, and then when they go home, they just take it off the van, they put it on the house. So they got rid of their own cable bill.
And I have like very good service. Very, 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 very. I live in an area where it's probably some of the best in the United States.
Yeah.
But most people, I think Starlink is faster than the service that they're getting at home.
It is. Yeah, it's faster than what I used to have in my house on the East Coast, definitely.
Mm-hmm. So I even see people who aren't traveling, who aren't remote at maybe some point, moving over to Starlink. It's also a good deal when you think about the price too. Mm-hmm. I'm almost embarrassed to tell you how much I pay for my internet service, but I'm going to do it. It is packaged with some other things, so I'll say that. So I pay the cable company about $300 a month.
Wow.
And about 200 of that is for my internet service.
Yeah.
And it used to be more than that, but I've trimmed down the actual cable services. It used to be more than that.
Right.
So
let me talk about that.
It would be cheaper for me to get Starlink.
Yeah, let me talk about that for a second. Starlink is interesting because they just raised the price recently. It was in the news, and it's a factor of their success, because for the RV pack, so Starlink base price for your house is $110 a month, and then the mobile was $25 extra for the RV package. It was $135 a month, which, by the way, I paid double that. They just raised the price to $150 a month now for the package, primarily because I think they're really trying to slow down the purchasing of it. It's in major metropolitan areas, it's overtaxed. Can you hold on a second? I'm just being, oh, no, it's okay. It's people going by on a side-by-side. They're just taking video of my truck, and I wasn't sure if they were going to stop and make a lot of noise. But so as I was saying, the $150 a month is really, I think, trying to get a few people to maybe think about not getting it, because so if you understand how this works, each satellite can handle so much traffic. So here I am sitting in the southern tip of Baja. There's not a lot of traffic on it, which is one of the reasons why it's super fast and it's not being taxed. But now if I was in New York City, as an example, in a metropolitan area, there are more people on the satellite. So what Starlink has had to do is add satellites, more satellites in that sky in order to be able to handle the traffic. Mm-hmm. So the problem is that it just been inundated with new customers and new people trying to get onto the Starlink. And their goal, for those of you that aren't aware, they're really trying to cover the world. So rather than having to add extra satellites, let's say over New York City right now, they're really focused on expanding the latitude. So they've been adding, even from the last 6 months, it's gone way down into, now Central America is covered. Last year, it wasn't. So you can cover all the way up to Alaska now. As of this fall, you still, if you traveled up to Alaska past a certain latitude, you didn't have Starlink. Well, now there is. It's all the way up to the top. So they've been adding satellites. Every launch that they send up of the rocket, it's kind of interesting when you think about it. You own a rocket company and you own Starlink. So and the U.S. government pays you to send the rocket up to do transport and stuff to the International Space Station, and you piggyback your satellites on it. So I don't know if you guys realize this, that they're launching, like, each rocket that goes up, they can put like 50 Starlinks on. 50 satellites.
That's crazy.
They go out in a pod.
Crazy.
So they put, they send them up multiple times a month. So they're putting a lot of satellites up. But so in any case, it's $150 a month, but $150 a month is obviously well worth it. I mean, it's a non-replaceable. There are no other options. Interestingly enough, that price is dependent upon country. So for those of you that are listening to us out there that might be international or international travelers, I can get the same exact service, which, by the way, I have, in Mexico here for $55 a month. It's the exact same. So depending on what country you're in, and I've heard, do not quote me on this, and I can't confirm this, but I heard Guatemala is $11 a month. So if you got an address to ship it in Guatemala, you might be able to get Starlink even cheaper. But they work, they're continent based. So right now, Starlink, if you get a unit in this continent, of which Central America is in, it will work in North America. So it's
good information, very good information.
Priced kind of accordingly, I guess, to what they feel like you can afford. Also in the news, you probably heard that they had sent, I don't know how many Starlinks. The war in Iraq is essentially being run on Starlink. They put the satellites up over Ukraine when the war started, and the government is using Starlink to use their communications. So all of the data that's being transferred around that country is on Starlink. And they did that for free, actually. So depending on where you are. So people in Ukraine can get Starlink for free.
They didn't do it for free.
Well, you and I paid for it.
They get to fly rockets in the air, like you were saying. They're getting something for it.
Yeah, that's right.
So I just wanted to talk about Starlink with you. You mentioned you had WeBoost too.
Yep.
So if you had Starlink first,
Yeah.
would you get WeBoost?
That's a good question. I haven't really thought about that. Me being a techie kind of guy, I probably would, because in the cab of my truck when I'm driving, Starlink is not on, right? So yeah, the boost, and I will tell you, WeBoost works. It will definitely increase my cell coverage signal bars probably by 1 or if not 2 bars, and that can be significant. It's the difference between being able to make a call and maybe not being able to make a call. So I would probably have the WeBoost, particularly if you're a traveler in, let's say, in the United States. Here in Mexico, I would tell you that no, I probably wouldn't get it. The coverage here is pretty poor. Even when your phone, and if you're on a GSM network like T-Mobile or AT&T, your phone just works like anything normal down here. Verizon customers, that not the case. There's zero coverage down here if you got Verizon, but on a GSM phone, you could just basically cross the border. It just keeps working the same way it was working north of the border. But I will tell you, even when it says on the top of your screen, 3G or LTE, yeah, you try to post an Instagram picture or something, and it's not the same. It might say it is. So, the cell coverage is certainly not the same as what we've experienced in America, and probably what you guys out there, if you're in Europe, would experience.
All right, we're going to shift to something another trend that I'm seeing. I want to hear your opinion on this too. I'm noticing as I scroll through my social media and I watch on YouTube, there are a lot of people going to 40's on their rigs. 40-inch tires on their rigs. And I'm not talking about like a vehicle your size. I'm talking about a Jeep.
That's good, Phil. I was thinking 40's. Wow, that's a small tire, but
Toyota 4Runner, regular SUVs, they're putting the 40's on them. And I just want to know what your opinion is.
I'm going to give you my standard canned answer opinion here on vehicle modification. Having been through this with multiple vehicles, particularly Jeeps and Land Rovers. For those of you that don't know, I own 3 Jeeps. I've had, I don't know how many Land Rovers over the years, probably 15 or 20. And I've done everything from modifications from lift kits to big tires to, changing the yokes on the drive shafts because of the angle and you name it, I've done it. Nothing is ever as good as it is how it was engineered from the factory. I'm going to tell you that. The second that you modify something, it has what I would call unintended consequences. That's the word I like to use. Things that you didn't think about. So on the surface, I add 40-inch tires to the thing. Let's assume for a second that it fits. And I would imagine that you're probably having to do some wheel well modifications and some other stuff. But let's assume it fits. What you're not factoring in probably is the weight.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, moving weight is infinitely more weight than non-moving weight, which is wear and tear on brakes. It's wear and tear on the drivetrain. It's fuel economy. It goes on and on and on. It changes your gear ratio. So there's a lot of stuff that it affects. The advantage of bigger tires, obviously, is it's going to give you ground clearance, right? So, how much is ground clearance worth to you? And that's a loaded question, because it depends on what kind of vehicle you're driving and what the ground clearance, departure and approach angles look like in the first place, right? So, the other thing is accessibility. We could talk about that for a second too. So you go to 40-inch tires. I don't know how accessible they are, meaning like there's certain tires sizes out there that are more common than other sizes. So I don't know what the commonality of that is, which comes into play when I don't know, you're in Moab, Utah, and you rip 2 tires to shreds on some trail, and then you need a tire to get the heck out of there. Can you get that tire locally? I don't know. So all stuff to think about.
Well, most of the people that I see getting these 40s are people who have Overland in their name. They claim to be Overlanders, and I can't see you going on any significant trip with 40s. I couldn't imagine you doing the Pan American Highway with 40s.
I could tell you, Dan, you'll never get the tire.
That's what I'm saying.
You'll never find that tire, no.
And the other thing, I'll use myself as an example. I've told you this before. People are so underwhelmed when they see my Jeep in person, because they see it go to all these different places, and it looks like it's really raised up high. And when they see it, it's not really raised up that much. I got a 2.5-inch lift. I got 33-inch tires, and they're like really underwhelmed, but it goes everywhere yours goes.
Yeah.
And I haven't had any significant breakdowns on the trail. And when I go places like Moab and southern Utah, and when I do see people having major breakdowns, it is usually the highly modified vehicles. I'd say like 90% of the time when it's something to do with the suspension or something major, it's a heavily modified vehicle. It may not even be the suspension. It may be something wrong with the engine. But if you know what's going on, the reason why the engine is having a problem is because it's been overtaxed by something you did to the suspension. So
remember, when it was engineered, the half shafts, the axles, all of these things were designed for certain tolerances, right? So if I have Jeeps, well, I could talk about that. Land Rovers. I've broken probably 20 half shafts in my life in a Land Rover. They're this big, about that big, and they're made out of what I would call crappy metal. And, but it's a design that the engineers thought about. It's strong enough to do and carry the weight of the stock wheel and tire, and to take the torque that the engine and transmission can put out. And if it's taxed past that, that's what snaps. And it's kind of a fail-safe, right? Because it's a lot easier to replace a half shaft than your engine or your transmission or something else worse that's bigger that breaks, right? But I can tell you, and I've done it, when I lifted the Land Rover and I put bigger tires on it, and at the time those were like 37s, not 40s. Oh yeah, you'd be like, you give it enough welly there and a little bit of oomph, and you go ding, and then it go. Oh, you know what that sound was? There it goes, broke it again. And it's not made for that kind of torque.
The reason I wanted to discuss this is because I see people, they just watch a couple of YouTube videos and then they go make major moves on their vehicles, spending a lot of money, putting in a lot of effort and time and labor just off of a couple of videos of somebody they admire off of YouTube. And
well, Phil, it looks cool. I mean, let's not discount this, right? I mean, it looks cool, right? Because it's bigger,
right? And I don't have all.
This is American attitude, right?
But what I'm getting to is, so they see it look cool, and they're like, I can afford to buy those tires, I can afford to buy those springs and those shocks and that lift or blah blah blah. But what they're not getting out of the video is, if you do this. You need geometry brackets. You need all kinds of stuff, because the things.
And your angle is going to change. There's all sorts of stuff that alters.
So it can be done in a way that doesn't just destroy your vehicle, but it's far more extensive to do it than what is relayed in these YouTube videos that people do. They just slapped on some wheels and some springs, and I know some of these guys, and that ain't all you did.
No. Well, and that's the thing is, I mean, in my Rubicon JL, I have a theory that I've come upon at this point that I don't like to put any more than 2.5 inches of lift on something on a factory truck. That's what I did. I put a 2.5 inch lift kit on there. I changed I think the Rubicon, the JL came with 35s and I changed them to 37s. And that was the max. And that was a minimal amount. It made it a little bit more aggressive, gives you a little bit more clearance. And, it looks cool and everything, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But, it didn't fundamentally change the dynamics of the vehicle. And I think that's something, but having put a 5-inch lift kit before on a Land Rover Defender, I've been down this road, so I know. And that truck was nothing but trouble. Like once you do that, everything else, everything. Ultimately, you might as well just rebuild or build a whole new vehicle. Really.
And we kind of glossed over this. So I want to re-emphasize this. We both mentioned it, but I want to really emphasize this. If you want 40s, get 40s. Fine, do it. But if your intention is to cross borders and really actually be a nomad or an overlander or whatever you call it, 40s are a no-go. Well, 37s are a no-go.
Let's distinguish these two things right now while we're talking about this. There's a big difference between overlanding, nomadically adventure traveling on wheels, let's call it, and four-wheeling or wheeling or off-roading or whatever you want to call it. Because if your goal is to do the Pan American Highway, as an example, you're going to try to do it in such a way that you do not damage things, and you're going to go out of your way to try to be careful. Because the last thing, obviously, you want to break down in, back country somewhere, nowhere, Nicaragua, as an example. And you can't get parts, and you can't get tires, and you can't get this, and you can't get that, and blah, 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 blah. You can't get a tow, and whatever. So there's a big difference between that or setting up what I'm going to call my 4x4 rig with big tires and jacked up suspension and a bigger, let's smack a supercharger on the engine or whatever we're going to do. I'm not diminishing that at all. That has its use. It's just, we're talking about two different things here.
Absolutely. I agree 110%. But that's usually one of the first mistakes that I've seen in the little few experiences that I've had. People spend thousands of dollars on upgrades that they end up switching out for something else when they really realize, oh, this is not practical for what I'm actually going to do.
Yep. And I Phil, I get this a lot too with my truck, because people ask me, what's your tire situation? So we're sitting there talking about tires. My tires happen to be 48s on this truck. And it's they're huge and they're heavy. And I carry a spare, one spare though, not multiple spares. And so what happens in the event that, something goes wrong with me? Well, that is a concern. So my truck is not a truck that I would consider to be the path of least resistance or the safest vehicle to travel to do, say that, like, as an example, do you do the Pan American? Because I might have some unique parts and I might have a unique tire size. Now, having said that, because people do ask about the tires, the likelihood that I destroy my tire is a lot less than a normal tire on a normal SUV, because these things are like, they're like made out of steel almost. They're I forget what rating they are, but they're pretty rugged. And being that big, the likelihood that they're going to take impact wounds and whatnot is less. So not to say that it can't happen for sure, but it's less likely. But it is a concern, but I'm cognizant of it. So that is a weakness. It's like, I like to say every truck is like a turtle. If you flip it over, there's a part of a turtle shell that it can get attacked through, right? And everything has a weak point.
You have been listening to Waypoint Overland's Random Waypoints. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.